I've been investigating missing persons cases for over 2 decades, working with law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. But the Carvalho family disappearance still keeps me awake at night. What started as a dream vacation turned into one of the most disturbing mysteries I've ever encountered. The evidence we found 14 years later changed everything we thought we knew about their fate and opened doors to questions that mankind might never be ready to answer. Let me take you back to March 1987, to a time when the world seemed simpler, when families could disappear into the American wilderness and leave behind only whispers and theories. Roberto Carvalho, 42, was a successful mechanical engineer from São Paulo who had spent the better part of 5 years meticulously saving every real he could spare to bring his family to America. This wasn't just a vacation for Roberto. It was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream that had begun in childhood when he'd watched American westerns dubbed in Portuguese at the local cinema. Roberto had immigrated to Brazil from Portugal as a young boy with his parents, fleeing economic hardship in the old country. He'd grown up poor but determined, working his way through engineering school while supporting his widowed mother. By 1987, he had built a successful consulting practice specializing in industrial machinery, but he'd never forgotten his humble beginnings or his dream of seeing the American West that had captivated his imagination for so long. His wife, Maria, 38, was a gentle soul who taught elementary school in one of São Paulo's middle-class neighborhoods. She had met Roberto at a church social in 1968, and they'd been inseparable ever since. Maria was the practical one in the relationship, the one who kept detailed household budgets and made sure their twin children never wanted for anything, despite Roberto's obsession with saving for their American adventure. She spoke decent English, having studied it in college with dreams of becoming a translator before motherhood changed her priorities. Their twins, Carlos and Carmen, were both 16 and represented everything hopeful about the next generation. Carlos was the artistic one, always sketching in his notebooks, dreaming of becoming an architect like Oscar Niemeyer. He had his father's methodical nature, but his mother's gentle temperament. Carmen was the adventurous spirit, the one who collected postcards from around the world and could name the capital of every country. She spoke English better than both her parents, having convinced them to let her take extra classes after school. Roberto had planned this vacation with the precision of an engineering project. For 3 years, he had researched every aspect of their journey, corresponding with American travel agencies, studying maps, reading guidebooks, and even learning basic English phrases. He had calculated costs down to the penny, accounting for exchange rates, tips, emergency funds, and even potential medical expenses. The trip was scheduled for 3 weeks. They would fly from São Paulo to Denver, rent a car, and explore the American West before flying home from Salt Lake City. The family had prepared for this trip like explorers, preparing for an expedition to uncharted territory. Roberto had purchased a brand new Nikon camera with multiple lenses, determined to document every moment of their adventure. He had bought new luggage, guidebooks in both Portuguese and English, and even a portable radio so they could listen to American music during their drives. Maria had sewn new clothes for the journey, wanting her family to look their best in America. The twins had each been given disposable cameras and small journals to record their own experiences. The excitement in the Carvalho household during the weeks leading up to their departure was palpable. Neighbors would stop by to see Roberto's maps spread across the dining room table, marked with colored pins indicating their planned route. Maria would show off the new outfits she had made for the family. Carlos would sketch American landmarks from the guidebooks, while Carmen practiced English phrases with her mother. It was a family united in anticipation of the adventure of a lifetime. They documented everything with Roberto's new Nikon camera from the moment they left São Paulo. Roberto was methodical about his photography, taking shots of them at the airport, on the plane, during their layover in Miami, and finally arriving in Denver. He kept a detailed journal, noting not just expenses and mileage, but also his impressions of America, the friendliness of the people they met, and his family's reactions to everything they experienced. The family were methodical tourists in the best sense of the word. They visited every major landmark Roberto had marked on his maps, taking photos at each location with the systematic approach of people who knew this might be their only chance to see these wonders. Roberto would set up careful shots, making sure the lighting was right, that everyone was positioned perfectly. Maria collected postcards from every stop, writing detailed notes on the back about their experiences to share with friends back home. The twins documented their own perspectives. Carlos sketching architectural details that caught his eye, Carmen writing poetry about the vast American landscapes in her journal. Their rental car was a red Ford Taurus with Colorado plates, license number CFH 471. Roberto had specifically requested a reliable, fuel-efficient vehicle from the rental company at Denver International Airport. He had studied the car thoroughly before leaving the lot, noting its mileage, checking the spare tire, and ensuring all the documentation was in order. The car represented freedom to Roberto, the ability to explore America at his own pace, to stop whenever something caught their attention, to truly experience the country rather than just pass through it on tour buses. For nearly 2 weeks, everything went according to Roberto's carefully laid plans. They visited Rocky Mountain National Park, where Carlos made detailed sketches of the dramatic peaks and Carmen collected wildflowers to press in her journal. They drove through Utah's red rock country, stopping at every scenic overlook Roberto had marked on his maps. In each location, Roberto would consult his compass and altimeter, recording precise details about their location and elevation in his journal. The family's routine was well established by the time they reached Wyoming. They would wake early, have breakfast at a local diner where they could practice their English with friendly waitresses, and then spend the day exploring. Roberto would drive carefully, never exceeding the speed limit, while Maria navigated with their collection of maps. The twins would alternate between the front and back seats, taking turns choosing the radio station and deciding where to stop for lunch. Their last confirmed sighting was at a Texaco gas station in Rock Springs, Wyoming, on March 28, 1987, at approximately 2:30 p.m. The station attendant, a weathered man named Bill Henderson, would later remember them clearly during police questioning. He recalled Roberto asking about road conditions ahead, Carlos inquiring about the best routes to see wild horses, and Carmen buying postcards from the station's small gift shop. Roberto had purchased a detailed topographical map of the area, studying it carefully while the car was being fueled. Henderson later told investigators that the family seemed excited and happy, completely unaware that they would never be seen alive again. Roberto had asked about camping regulations in the national forest, and Henderson had warned them about the unpredictable weather in the mountains. Maria had thanked him in her careful English, and Carmen had asked if there were any local legends or ghost stories about the area. Henderson had laughed and mentioned some old Native American stories about spirits in the forest, but he hadn't taken her questions seriously. The family had also stopped at a nearby camping supply store, where they purchased additional batteries for their flashlights, extra film for Roberto's camera, and some emergency food supplies. The store owner, Margaret Sullivan, remembered Maria's kindness when she helped an elderly customer who had dropped her groceries. Carlos had been fascinated by the store's collection of geological maps, while Carmen had spent time reading books about local wildlife. They had seemed like the perfect American family vacation, despite being tourists from Brazil. What happened next remains a mystery that has puzzled investigators, psychologists, and amateur detectives for decades. The family simply vanished somewhere between Rock Springs and their planned destination of Jackson Hole, a journey that should have taken no more than 4 hours on well-traveled highways. Their rental car disappeared with them. No witnesses came forward despite extensive media coverage. No accident reports were filed, no distress calls were received. It was as if the Wyoming wilderness had reached out and swallowed them whole without leaving a single trace behind. The terrain between Rock Springs and Jackson Hole is some of the most beautiful and unforgiving in North America. Vast stretches of sagebrush desert give way to dense forests of pine and aspen, while mountain peaks rise dramatically against endless skies. It's a landscape that can inspire profound spirituality in some visitors, while striking deep fear in others. The sheer scale of the wilderness can make humans feel insignificant, temporary, vulnerable to forces beyond their understanding or control. Local weather records from March 28, 1987, show that conditions were clear when the family was last seen. But a severe storm system moved through the area that evening. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and snow began falling around 8 p.m. By midnight, nearly 6 inches had accumulated in the higher elevations. If the family had encountered car trouble or had decided to camp in an exposed area, the weather could have turned deadly very quickly. The initial search began when the family failed to return their rental car on March 30, 1987. The rental company's computers automatically flagged the overdue vehicle, triggering a call to the local police. When officers contacted the airline, they discovered that the Carvalho family had also missed their scheduled flight back to São Paulo. Roberto's emergency contact, his brother Manuel in Brazil, confirmed that the family had not returned home and was not answering their hotel in Salt Lake City. Within hours of the missing persons report being filed, the wheels of a massive search operation began turning. The Wyoming State Police immediately issued a bolo alert for the red Ford Taurus, and dispatchers began contacting every law enforcement agency between Rock Springs and Salt Lake City. The family's disappearance was treated as a potential medical emergency, given the severe weather conditions that had moved through the area. Search efforts intensified dramatically when Maria's sister, Isabella, flew in from Brazil 2 days later. Isabella provided crucial details about the family's methodical nature and their planned route. She emphasized that Roberto would never deviate from his schedule without calling someone, and that Maria was far too responsible to simply disappear without contacting family. Isabella's arrival also brought media attention to the case, with local television stations beginning to cover the story of the missing Brazilian family. The Wyoming State Police launched what would become one of the largest search operations in the state's history. They deployed helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras, organized ground teams of volunteers and professional search and rescue personnel, and brought in tracking dogs from as far away as Colorado. The Civil Air Patrol contributed aircraft and experienced spotters. The National Guard provided additional helicopters and communication equipment. For 3 weeks, teams searched thousands of square miles of rugged terrain. They followed every possible route the family might have taken, examined every side road and trail, and investigated every report of abandoned vehicles or suspicious activity. Divers searched lakes and rivers. Technical climbing teams explored remote canyons and cliff faces. Metal detector teams swept areas where the car might have left the road and been hidden by vegetation. Despite this massive effort, searchers found absolutely nothing. Not a single tire track that could be definitively linked to the Ford Taurus. Not a piece of clothing or camping equipment. Not even a piece of broken glass or plastic that might have come from their vehicle. The Carvalho family had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only questions and an increasingly desperate search effort. Theories began emerging almost immediately, each more disturbing than the last. The most obvious explanation was that the family had encountered mechanical trouble in a remote area and had died of exposure during the unexpected snowstorm. Search teams focused heavily on this possibility, examining every ravine and hidden valley where a disabled vehicle might have been trapped by the weather. Other investigators theorized that the family had been victims of foul play. The late 1980s had seen several high-profile cases of tourists being targeted by criminals in remote areas. The theory suggested that someone had forced the family off the road, murdered them, and hidden both their bodies and their vehicle so effectively that no trace remained. This theory was supported by reports of suspicious individuals in the area around the time of the disappearance. The most disturbing theory came from Tom Whitehorse, a local rancher whose family had lived in the area for 3 generations. Whitehorse claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky on the night of March 28th, moving in patterns unlike any aircraft he had ever observed. He described them as bright, silent, and seeming to search the forest methodically. When investigators pressed him for details, Whitehorse became evasive, saying only that his grandfather had told him stories about things in those mountains that white men weren't meant to understand. Investigators initially dismissed Whitehorse's claims as the ramblings of an eccentric old man, but they couldn't ignore the fact that several other witnesses had reported unusual activity in the area around the time of the disappearance. A truck driver claimed to have seen lights moving through the forest in a coordinated pattern. A Forest Service employee reported equipment malfunctions and compass readings that made no sense. A family camping in the area described being awakened by sounds they couldn't identify. Not quite animal, not quite human, but definitely not natural. As weeks turned to months, the case began to grow cold despite continued efforts by multiple agencies. The FBI joined the investigation in April 1987, bringing additional resources and expertise. Federal agents interviewed dozens of potential witnesses, examined hundreds of tips and leads, and coordinated with Interpol to investigate the possibility that the family had somehow left the country. They brought in criminal profilers to analyze the case and technical experts to examine every piece of potential evidence. The Brazilian consulate exerted significant diplomatic pressure on American authorities to find answers. Roberto's engineering firm hired a prestigious private investigation agency, sparing no expense in their efforts to locate their missing employee and his family. Media coverage expanded beyond Wyoming to national and international outlets, bringing thousands of additional tips and leads that had to be individually investigated. Despite all these efforts, involving hundreds of investigators and costing millions of dollars, the Carvalho family remained missing without a trace. By autumn of 1987, even the most optimistic investigators had begun to accept that the family was likely dead, though their bodies and vehicle had never been found. The case represented a complete failure of modern law enforcement and search technology, a reminder that even in the late 20th century, people could still vanish without explanation. The psychological impact on the investigators was profound. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had led the Wyoming State Police investigation, later described the case as the most frustrating of her career. She had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, but had never encountered a disappearance so complete, so lacking in any physical evidence or logical explanation. Martinez retired early partly because of the Carvalho case, unable to accept that she had failed to find answers for a grieving family. Search teams also struggled with the case's emotional toll. Veteran searchers who had found bodies in seemingly impossible locations were baffled by their complete inability to locate any trace of the Carvalho family. Some reported having nightmares about the endless Wyoming wilderness, hiding secrets they could never uncover. Several search and rescue volunteers requested transfers to other regions, unable to continue working in an area that had swallowed an entire family without explanation. The case officially went cold in January 1989, though it was never formally closed. Lead investigators were reassigned to other cases as budget constraints and administrative pressure forced the Wyoming State Police to prioritize more recent disappearances. The FBI maintained the case in their files, but ceased active investigation. The massive search operation was scaled back to occasional patrols by forest rangers and local deputies. Roberto's brother Manuel continued to call American authorities every few months, but the trail had gone completely dead. The family's disappearance became just another unsolved mystery in the vast American West, filed away with dozens of other cases where people had vanished into the wilderness and never returned. Manuel aged visibly during those years, his hopes slowly giving way to a resigned acceptance that he would never know what happened to his brother's family. The case began to attract attention from amateur investigators and conspiracy theorists as the years passed. Online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries featured detailed discussions of the Carvalho disappearance. Some proposed elaborate theories involving government cover-ups, alien abductions, or secret military experiments. Others suggested that the family had somehow faked their own disappearance, though no credible motive was ever proposed for such an elaborate deception. Books and articles were written about the case, each offering new theories but no concrete answers. Documentary filmmakers traveled to Wyoming to examine the search areas and interview witnesses. Television shows featured reenactments of the family's last known movements. Despite all this attention, no new evidence emerged, and the case remained as mysterious as ever. Local folklore began to incorporate the Carvalho disappearance into older legends about the Wyoming wilderness. Native American tribal elders spoke privately about areas of the forest that had always been avoided, places where the spirits of the land were said to be restless and dangerous. Some claimed that the family had unknowingly entered sacred ground and had been taken by forces that white men couldn't understand. These stories were dismissed by investigators but continued to circulate among local residents. The area where the family was believed to have disappeared became something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in unsolved mysteries. Amateur investigators would camp in the forest, hoping to discover some clue that professional searchers had missed. Most found nothing, but a few reported strange experiences, equipment malfunctions, unusual sounds, and feelings of being watched by unseen presences. As the 1990s progressed, the Carvalho case faded from public attention. New missing persons cases captured media interest, and the Wyoming wilderness kept its secrets. Roberto's extended family in Brazil slowly came to terms with their loss, though they never stopped hoping for answers. Manuel established a small memorial fund that provided scholarships for Brazilian students to study in America, honoring his brother's love for the country where his family had vanished. By the late 1990s, most of the original investigators had retired or moved on to other assignments. The case files gathered dust in storage facilities, occasionally reviewed by new detectives, but yielding no fresh insights. The Wyoming wilderness continued to attract thousands of visitors each year, most of whom had never heard of the Carvalho family and remained unaware of the mystery that haunted those mountains. Then, in August 2001, 14 years after the disappearance, everything changed. Forest Ranger Jake Morrison was conducting a routine patrol in the Medicine Bow National Forest when he spotted something unusual. Morrison, 34, was a 15-year veteran of the Forest Service who prided himself on his observational skills and knowledge of his territory. He had heard stories about the missing Brazilian family, but had never been directly involved in the search efforts. Morrison was following a rarely used logging road about 40 miles northeast of Rock Springs when something caught his eye. Partially buried under years of accumulated leaves, pine needles, and forest debris was what appeared to be a piece of leather. Most rangers would have walked past such a common sight, but Morrison's training had taught him to notice anything that seemed out of place in the natural environment. The leather turned out to be a camera case, and Morrison's heart began racing as he carefully brushed away the debris. The case was weathered but intact, and inside was a camera that he immediately recognized as expensive equipment from the 1980s. Morrison knew enough about the Carvalho case to understand the potential significance of his discovery, and he immediately radioed for backup before disturbing the scene any further. What Morrison had found would change everything investigators thought they knew about the Carvalho family's fate. It was Roberto's Nikon camera, still in its leather case, miraculously protected from 14 years of Wyoming weather. The camera body was damaged and corroded, but Morrison could see that the film advance mechanism was intact. More importantly, the camera felt heavier than it should have if the film had been exposed to the elements and deteriorated. Morrison secured the scene and contacted the Wyoming State Police, who dispatched Detective Linda Chen to examine the discovery. Chen was a 12-year veteran who had studied the Carvalho case during her training, but had never expected to work on it actively. She approached the camera with the excitement of an investigator who knew she might be handling the first physical evidence in one of Wyoming's most famous unsolved cases. The camera was carefully transported to the State Crime Laboratory in Cheyenne, where forensic technicians examined it under controlled conditions. The camera body showed extensive environmental damage, but the internal mechanisms were surprisingly well preserved. Most importantly, there was indeed film inside the camera, and preliminary examination suggested that at least some of the images might be recoverable. The film processing required extreme care and specialized techniques. The FBI's forensic laboratory in Denver was consulted, and their technicians worked for 3 days to carefully extract and develop the film. The anticipation among investigators was palpable. After 14 years of questions, they finally had a chance to see through the eyes of the Carvalho family during their final hours. What they found on those photographs would haunt everyone involved in the case for the rest of their lives. The roll of film contained 36 exposures, chronicling the family's journey from their arrival in Denver through their final day. The early photos showed happy tourists visiting landmarks, eating at restaurants, and enjoying their American adventure exactly as their families in Brazil had imagined. But the final photographs told a very different story. The last 10 images on the roll showed the family setting up what appeared to be an impromptu camp in a clearing deep within the Medicine Bow National Forest. The photos were taken in late afternoon light, and the family appeared relaxed and happy as they arranged their sleeping bags and prepared a simple meal over a portable camping stove. However, there was something profoundly wrong with these images that became apparent only upon careful examination. In several of the photographs, dark figures could be seen moving in the background among the trees. The figures were indistinct and partially obscured by shadows and vegetation, but they were definitely human in shape and appeared to be watching the family from a distance. The figures seemed to be positioned strategically around the clearing, as if they were surrounding the family without the Carvalho's knowledge. In one photograph, taken while Roberto was setting up their tent, at least 3 separate figures could be identified in different locations around the perimeter of the campsite. The family clearly had not noticed these watchers as they continued their camping activities without any sign of concern or awareness. The penultimate photograph was taken by Carmen and showed her parents and brother sitting around their camping stove, eating what appeared to be canned soup heated over the flame. Roberto was smiling and pointing at something off-camera, probably telling one of his stories about their adventures. Maria was laughing, her face lit by the warm glow of the camp stove. Carlos was sketching in his notebook, capturing details of their wilderness camp. But the final photograph was the most disturbing image any of the investigators had ever seen. It showed Carmen pointing towards something outside the frame. Her expression transformed from the happiness of the earlier photos to obvious confusion and growing fear. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she was asking a question or calling out to someone. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, was what appeared to be a human figure watching them from behind a large pine tree. The timestamp on Roberto's camera indicated that this final photo was taken at 6:47 p.m. on March 28, 1987, just 4 hours and 17 minutes after their last confirmed sighting at the gas station in Rock Springs. The mathematical precision of that timeline would later prove to be significant in ways that investigators couldn't have imagined. Analysis of the photographs by FBI technical experts revealed details that made the case even more mysterious. The campsite was located in a remote section of the Medicine Bow National Forest, at least 20 miles from the nearest established campground and more than 5 miles from any marked hiking trail. GPS coordinates derived from landmark analysis and topographical comparison placed the location approximately 30 miles northeast of where the camera was found. The location made no sense according to Roberto's methodical travel planning. The family had been traveling from Rock Springs to Jackson Hole, a route that would have taken them northwest, not northeast. There was no logical reason for them to have traveled so far off their planned route into such a remote area. The detour would have required driving on increasingly primitive roads and eventually abandoning their vehicle to hike into the wilderness. Search teams were immediately dispatched to the coordinates derived from the photographic analysis. Using satellite imagery and GPS navigation, they were able to locate the exact clearing where the final photographs had been taken. What they found there defied explanation and added new layers of mystery to an already incomprehensible case. The clearing itself was exactly as it appeared in the photographs, down to the specific arrangement of trees and the large boulder where Roberto had apparently set up their camp stove. But there was no trace of the family, their belongings, or their vehicle anywhere in the area. The ground showed no sign of recent disturbance, and metal detector sweeps revealed nothing buried beneath the surface. Most disturbing of all, there was no evidence that a vehicle had ever been in the area. The clearing was accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that wound through dense forest for more than 5 miles. The trail was far too narrow and rough for any vehicle larger than an ATV, and certainly couldn't accommodate a Ford Taurus sedan. How the family had reached this remote location remained completely unexplained. The search team spent 3 days examining every inch of the clearing and the surrounding forest. They found no camping equipment, no food containers, no personal belongings, and no human remains. They used cadaver dogs to search for any trace of decomposed organic matter. They brought in ground-penetrating radar to examine the soil beneath the clearing. They climbed trees, looking for any equipment that might have been cached above ground level. The only unusual discovery was the presence of several trees around the perimeter of the clearing that showed evidence of having been climbed or damaged at human height. Bark had been scraped away in patterns, suggesting that someone had used the trees for support or concealment. The damage was old, potentially dating back 14 years, but it was impossible to determine exactly when it had occurred or who had caused it. What makes this case even more disturbing is what investigators discovered about the history of the area where the photographs were taken. Research into local records revealed that the section of forest where the clearing was located had been the site of several unexplained disappearances over the previous century. In 1923, a family of homesteaders had vanished from a cabin less than 2 miles from the clearing. In 1954, 2 hunters had disappeared while tracking elk in the same general area. In 1971, a group of geology students from the University of Wyoming had vanished during a field trip to study rock formations in the region. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Shoshone and Arapaho, had traditional stories about the area dating back centuries. Tribal elders spoke of a place where the spirits of the earth were restless, where people could disappear between one step and the next. According to these traditions, the area was avoided by hunting parties and was considered sacred but dangerous ground where humans were not welcome. The tribal stories described strange phenomena in the area, sounds that had no source, lights that moved through the forest without explanation, and a sense of being watched by unseen presences. Some stories told of people who had entered the area and returned changed, speaking of experiences they couldn't adequately describe, and warning others to stay away from certain sections of the forest. Modern investigation revealed that the area had indeed been the site of numerous reports of unusual activity over the years. Forest rangers had documented equipment malfunctions, compass readings that made no sense, and radio communications that were interrupted by unexplained interference. Hikers and campers had reported feeling watched, hearing sounds that didn't match any known wildlife, and experiencing equipment failures that resolved themselves once they left the area. The camera discovery raised more questions than it answered, creating new mysteries while providing no solutions to the original disappearance. How had the camera traveled from the remote clearing where the photographs were taken to the location where Ranger Morrison had found it 30 miles away? Why were there no other belongings from the family in either location? Most disturbing of all, who were the mysterious figures captured in the background of the final photographs? Enhanced digital analysis of the photographs was conducted by experts at the FBI's Forensic Imaging Laboratory. Using the most advanced computer enhancement techniques available in 2001, technicians were able to reveal additional details that had been invisible in the original prints. The analysis confirmed the presence of at least 3 distinct human figures positioned around the perimeter of the clearing, but their identities remained completely unknown. The figures appeared to be adult humans of average height and build, but their clothing and other identifying characteristics were obscured by shadows and vegetation. They seemed to be positioned strategically to observe the family from multiple angles, suggesting coordination and planning rather than chance encounters. Most disturbing was the realization that the figures had apparently been watching the family for some time, as they appeared in multiple photographs taken over a period of nearly an hour. Facial recognition technology was applied to the enhanced images, but the resolution and lighting conditions made identification impossible. The figures remained shadowy presences at the edge of human perception, visible enough to confirm their existence, but too indistinct to provide any meaningful clues about their identities or intentions. Criminal profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit were brought in to analyze the evidence and develop theories about what might have happened to the family. Their assessment was deeply disturbing. The positioning of the figures around the clearing suggested a coordinated surveillance operation, possibly leading to an abduction or worse. The remote location indicated detailed knowledge of the area and careful planning. The complete absence of physical evidence suggested either extraordinary luck or professional expertise in evidence disposal. The profilers developed several possible scenarios, none of them offering much hope for the family's survival. The most likely explanation involved a group of individuals who had targeted the family for reasons unknown, lured or forced them to the remote location, and then disposed of all evidence so thoroughly that no trace remained after 14 years. Such an operation would require significant planning, local knowledge, and possibly access to equipment for moving or destroying evidence. Alternative theories were even more disturbing. Some investigators suggested that the family might have encountered a survivalist group or cult operating in the remote wilderness. Others proposed that they had stumbled upon illegal activities, drug operations, weapons smuggling, or worse, and had been eliminated to protect the criminals' secrecy. The most exotic theories involved government cover-ups or experimental programs, though no evidence supported such speculation. Today, more than 3 decades after their disappearance, the Carvalho family case remains officially unsolved. The camera and its photographs are stored in the Wyoming State Police Evidence Room, catalogued under case number 874471. The images are occasionally reviewed by new investigators, but no fresh insights have emerged. The case file has grown to include thousands of pages of reports, witness statements, and expert analyses, but the central mystery remains as incomprehensible as ever. Roberto's brother Manuel, now in his 70s and suffering from declining health, still calls American authorities every year on the anniversary of the disappearance. His calls are taken by sympathetic officers who have nothing new to report, but who treat the grieving brother with the respect his long vigil deserves. Manuel has never stopped hoping for answers, though he privately acknowledges that the truth might be more terrifying than the mystery itself. The area where the photographs were taken has become something of a pilgrimage site for people fascinated by unsolved mysteries. Despite warnings from forest rangers and local authorities, amateur investigators regularly attempt to reach the remote clearing. Some report strange experiences, equipment malfunctions, unusual sounds, and feelings of being watched by unseen presences. Others find nothing unusual and dismiss such reports as the products of overactive imaginations influenced by knowledge of the case. What I find most haunting about this case, after all these years of investigation and analysis, is the precise timing of the camera's discovery. The family disappeared on March 28, 1987. The final photograph was taken at 6:47 p.m. that same day. But the camera wasn't found until August 15, 2001, exactly 14 years, 4 months, and 18 days later. That level of mathematical precision cannot be coincidental. Someone or something wanted that camera to be found at exactly that moment in time. But the question that continues to haunt everyone involved in this case is why? What purpose was served by revealing those final photographs after 14 years of silence? What message was intended by showing us those shadowy figures watching the family during their final documented moments? The Carvalho family came to America seeking adventure and created memories to last a lifetime. Instead, they became part of a mystery that challenges our understanding of what's possible in the modern world. Their story reminds us that even in an age of satellites and cell phones, of GPS tracking and instant communication, people can still vanish completely, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that the Carvalho family's fate wasn't unique. Perhaps they were simply the most thoroughly documented case in a pattern of disappearances that stretches back generations. Perhaps those shadowy figures in the photographs are still out there, still watching, still waiting for the next unsuspecting family to venture too far into the Wyoming wilderness. The camera sits in its evidence locker, a silent witness to events that no living person can explain. The photographs remain as clear and disturbing as the day they were developed, frozen moments that capture the last known images of a family that trusted in the safety of the modern world and discovered too late that some places operate by older, darker rules. Until new evidence emerges, until someone comes forward with answers, until the wilderness finally gives up its secrets, the Carvalho family will remain missing. Not just from the world of the living, but from the realm of the explicable. Their story stands as a reminder that some mysteries are so profound, so fundamentally disturbing, that they challenge our basic assumptions about reality itself. The investigation continues, though hope fades with each passing year. But somewhere in the vast Wyoming wilderness, the truth waits to be discovered. And perhaps someday we'll finally understand what happened to Roberto, Maria, Carlos, and Carmen Carvalho during those final hours in the forest, and why their story was meant to be told through 14-year-old photographs that should never have survived to tell their tale.